There are places in time and space that galvanize people and their thoughts and their feelings and their ideas in a way that allows for a shared history to emerge. Sugar City, that sweet center of a rusty arts community, is one of those places. And although they may be closing their physical space, the dedicated and compassionate people, affectionately known as Sugar Citizens, will find new methods of creating innovative ways for people to share their ideas and their personal expressions.
How now?
How now?
How now?
How now?
How now?
This is how now. How now?
What does it mean to KEWLEY? It's love found racing in the streets. Whoa! Those horses, bring it up. Shing-a-ling with crop stirrer. Aimee, why don't you tell us, about like the beginning ideas behind what grew to be Sugar City?
For sure. So I think part of it was when I was still in college, I was going to like punk shows and Hall Walls and Squeaky Wheel and stuff, and wasn't seeing all of the classmates or friends of mine there. And I was sort of like asked them like, why aren't you guys going to all these other arty things? And they just said, I don't know. It's sort of like, I don't know these people. They're drinking wine. I don't know them. I don't really feel that welcome. And then I had Caroline Coble was a really amazing professor. Caroline Tennant was really great, graduate student, and Tony Conrad at that time. So I was chatting with them about these issues. Like, you keep telling us to go to these things, but no one's going to them but me. And then Tony Conrad just said, like, well, if people aren't going to those spaces, then make your own. Like, make a space where you feel important and welcome in. And so that was kind of like the seeds of what came Sugar City. So that idea from not feeling totally part of what was already existing ended up becoming this series in our attic in the University Heights for a year called Not Usual Suspects that I did with Kathy Duran when we were roommates. Having that experience, I just started talking to my friends about starting something new. We had like our first meeting in February at Natalie Connor's house in the Heights to just come up with ideas. And so we just kind of like listed and talked as a group about like what Buffalo needed. And so the idea of sort of bringing the underground above ground by having like an accessible low cost space that was legal and having it be all ages was really important to us.
Yesterday, I'm at my parents' house. I'm digging in the backyard with my dad. We were trying to dig up a water line. And I come across this is true, this is not a bit, come across a big Rubbermaid tote buried like 6 inches under the soil, and I pull it up, and it was something that I completely forgot about. It was a time capsule that I buried when I was a little kid. It was from it was from when I was 12, so that would have been 1995.
Yeah, so Dan, how was that? How did you get like interested? How did you know to come to those first meetings? And can you describe like the energy in the room at that?
Yeah, I was going to the events in Aimee and Kathy's attic, and concurrently, and before that, I had been going to a lot of like house shows and DIY spaces, like the short-lived spots at Access Info Shop, and I guess like the Hey Dude record stores and places like that. None of those lasted very long. And so I think my inspiration was similar to what Aimee said, was to try to bring those events above ground. And so you could actually like promote them and build a community outside of, sort of like the insider spots where, you had to really know somebody to be involved, and maybe you didn't feel comfortable going to somebody's house and kind of take that and make it more accessible to everybody.
Yeah. Can you just talk a little bit about 29 Custer Street and that whole area of the Heights, and how, because it seems like that's where both of these, where these things kind of came out of.
Punk shows started in the Heights in the mid to late 90s, I think specifically at 33 Tyler Street, which is before my time. And that kind of merged into the late 90s, early 2000s with the 160 Wind Spear and 99 Custer for primarily as the DIY punk shows, like huge bands like Thursday, Mastodon, Coheed and Cambria, like tons of bands like that came through and played small DIY. The thing I loved about these shows were you'd watch the bands and then you'd hang out in the living room or outside, and you got to meet people and have this community. And it's just like you saw all these bands locally and internationally that were awesome. It was really a building of community. You're talking about now, like house shows and community, like that's the real detachment for me. The sad part about Sugar City closing now is I don't like going to bar shows, and it seems like there's a lot of bar shows now. I kind of miss that. Friends in a basement, community, or local DIY spot like Sugar City, Vault, Sound Lab.
So finding our space on Watchers was pretty magical because that was just a Craigslist ad. We were meeting the owner of the building, Wendis, and she was like pretty cool and like really hip to our idea. And we were a little surprised because we met a couple other landlords that were just like, what are you guys doing? And her space was like pretty rough and affordable. And then she invited us upstairs to her apartment because she was living up there. Cause she owned 19 Wattsburg and then 3 of the houses next to it. She was renovating herself too, which I found really inspiring.
Wow.
So we went to her kitchen and there's like a painting of Kurt Cobain like next to her refrigerator, and we're like, oh, that's cool. And then she kept mentioning like, oh, her brother lives in the Northwest and he has some record label. And then the next day she emailed us saying, oh, thanks, it was so great to meet you all. I had a discussion with my brother and he says like we should really go forward in hosting this. And her brother is Kelvin Johnson from K Records. And so K Records is also one of those like, you know, smaller labels that really promotes the all ages ethos that we also were going after too.
Talking outlaw woman, you don't need a thing to me. But would be my outlaw woman, it would be together happily.
How did the flow of artists start in January of 2009, and then where did that go from? You know, how does that move?
Well, as far as I guess the model for staying open and the booking, you know, we mainly existed as a facilitating group for people to do their own events.
Yeah.
So the idea was that people would be able to rent the art gallery or rent the back room for, you know, for a music show or some other kind of event. But we kind of left it up to the community to kind of, you know, book the things that they wanted with the idea that, you know, we would exist as long as people wanted to use the space.
To quote unquote be a Sugar citizen there's like no voting process. It was just you wanted to volunteer at shows that weren't your own and clean up the space. And if really needed, you would help pay the rent, which I think only happened once. And part of the trade-off of becoming a Sugar citizen is that you could basically do what you wanted in the space.
Yeah.
So that offered a lot of creative freedom, especially for someone like me to just be like, well, I'm here like at least 12 hours a week anyways. I feel comfortable in this space and supported in this space, so let's do some banana ideas, you know, some wild things. And I think that's part of too when Curtis got involved, like using the gallery for the fun a day at the original space, doing the chili cook-offs. Those were like fun alternative things that were outside of the scope of just being another music venue, which I really appreciated. And I think part of that was also highlighted like when we had to close Wadsworth, we had the last 30 days of awesome is what we called it. And so every day for 30 days we were open and had something going on every day.
It was awesome.
It was awesome. And some of those days, like one of the most memorable was like Peter Schick and Frank Topolsky did the Jan Deck Fog Tub Night, where they just filled the whole space with fog. And I think at that point, I mean, Frank ran Kitchen before, but he was really starting to get wild with his lighting and fog, which in music and sounds that he's
totally
for now. And so like Frank and Peter set up like 5 speakers around the space, and Frank was like, you know, moving and panning back and forth, and you're so disoriented because the whole space was full of fog that it was kind of like scary, fun, and anxiety inducing. And like, where else would that happen, to be honest, you know?
Everywhere I go, everyone I know comes with wonder. How many more can fit inside this crowded, crazy heart? Just don't let it be the last time come into my life. No, don't let it be the last time come into my life.
The thing that I thought was like amazing that Sugar City did was the show, the train show, you know, where there was, you know, different music performances at different train stops, and it was gorgeous, you know. So can you talk a little bit about how that came about?
The suggestion I had for the last 30 days of Awesome at the Space, I'm like, I want to have performers at each subway stop and on the subway in between.
Yeah.
And Andy, who helps run Sugar City, works for NFTA and talked to his managers like, you'll get arrested. They'll shut it down and you'll go to jail. So we're like, well, I guess we're not going to do this as one of the last 30 days of Awesome.
Yeah.
And that's when the meeting with Sandra, I was at it, was at Sweetness 7. And I think, Amy or Pat or Dan were just like, we have this idea once of doing this thing on the subway where you get on and off the subway and there's events. And Sandra's like, that's a great idea. UB will talk to NFTA. And I think that really was able to be like the credibility of UB plus probably a hefty insurance policy was able to get that one through. Yeah. But, you know, that's kind of really comes full circle to right now where we lost a space, but we weren't quitting. We're still doing events. So that was like one of the events we did in between spaces. Just kind of where we're at now.
That's an interesting parallel, because that is kind of what's going on right now. Like, and the way that Sugar City is set up, it's not confined to an actual physical space.
Well, for sure. And I think too, because of, I would hope, our transparency and community vibes, that a lot of people have worked with us and will work with us as well. Mm-hmm. Like that idea too, that like, you know, Sandra wanted to work with us from UB, which led to the NTA wanting to work with us. And, you know, we had Sunday Soup at the Polish Library, you know, like people just knew that we were pretty cool, mostly responsible, community-based people. And so I think, like Curtis said, like whenever COVID-19 restrictions pick up, I'm sure Sugar City will have access to lots of spaces to support some of this outside the box programming that we've done.
Yeah.
And we'll hopefully continue to do. By we, not me, because I abandoned you all. So have fun.